He allegedly wrote that she wasn't waking up and asked what he should do. At first glance, it might sound like someone panicking in a terrifying moment. But prosecutors argue the conversation didn't stop there. In fact, they say Lee continued asking questions that, according to investigators, suggest he might have been trying to figure out how to explain what happened. And when authorities later discovered Gabriella Perpetuo dead inside the home, those digital messages suddenly became a critical part of the investigation. Now the former football player who once ran onto NFL fields every Sunday is walking into a courtroom instead. As the case unfolds, one question is haunting everyone who is following the story. Was this a desperate attempt to save someone? Or the beginning of a cover-up? Because what investigators claim happened next only makes the mystery even darker. Before the headlines, before the courtroom, Darron Lee was known for something completely different. Speed, power, and the dream of becoming the next defensive superstar in the National Football League. Back in 2016, Lee's future looked incredibly bright. Coming out of college as one of the most exciting young linebackers in the country, he was selected in the first round of the 2016 NFL Draft. For many players, just hearing their name called on draft night is life-changing. But Lee didn't just get drafted. He was picked 20th overall by the New York Jets, instantly becoming one of the team's most talked-about young defenders. Fans saw him as a rising star. Analysts praised his athleticism. And for a while, it looked like he might become a long-term force in the league. Over the next few years, Lee bounced across several teams. After his time with the Jets, he spent periods with the Kansas City Chiefs, the Buffalo Bills, and later the Las Vegas Raiders. From the outside, it still looked like a typical NFL journey: talented player, moving between teams, chasing another big season. But behind the scenes, his football career slowly began to fade. By the early 2020s, Lee was no longer the rising star people once expected. His time in the league had quietly come to an end after just 5 seasons. And while many former athletes move on to coaching, business, or media careers, Lee's name would soon return to the headlines for a reason no one could have predicted. Because years after leaving the NFL spotlight, he would walk into a courtroom, not as a player, but as the central figure in a case prosecutors say involves murder, evidence tampering, and a series of disturbing digital messages. But the real mystery begins on a quiet night inside a home in Ooltewah, Tennessee. That's where Gabriella Perpetuo was found dead, a discovery that would instantly trigger a full-scale investigation. At first, details about what happened inside the house were confusing. Reports suggested that Darron Lee claimed his fiancée had injured herself during some kind of episode. According to statements revealed later in court, he allegedly described seeing her with swollen eyes and other injuries. But something about the situation didn't sit right with investigators. Authorities responding to the scene reportedly noticed details that raised serious questions. Certain injuries didn't appear to match the explanation being given. And as detectives began piecing together what might have happened in the hours before Gabriella was discovered, the timeline started to look even more suspicious. What began as a tragic death was quickly being treated as something far more serious. Investigators started digging deeper into what had happened inside the home that night. They examined the physical evidence, reviewed statements, and began reconstructing the final hours before Gabriella's death. And then another unexpected clue emerged. During the investigation, prosecutors say they discovered something unusual, something digital. According to court proceedings, the day before Gabriella was found dead, Lee had allegedly been messaging an AI chatbot asking what to do when someone isn't waking up. At first glance, that might sound like panic. But prosecutors would soon argue it was something very different. Because when detectives looked closer at those messages, they noticed questions that made the situation even more disturbing. But the most unsettling twist in this case didn't come from the crime scene. It came from a series of digital messages. During a court hearing, prosecutors revealed that Darron Lee had allegedly turned to ChatGPT shortly before Gabriella Perpetuo was found dead. And according to officials, what he asked the AI quickly raised serious alarms. Prosecutors told the court that Lee allegedly sent a message describing a chaotic and disturbing situation inside the house. In the message, he claimed his fiancée had injured herself and said she had 2 swollen eyes. He reportedly suggested the wounds were self-inflicted, adding that she had stabbed herself and slit her eye. Then came the moment that stunned investigators. Lee allegedly wrote that she wasn't waking up and asked the chatbot what he should do. At first, that might sound like someone desperate for help in a terrifying moment. Someone confused. Someone panicking. But prosecutors say the conversation didn't stop there. According to statements presented in court, Lee continued asking questions and receiving responses from the AI. One of the responses shown during the hearing allegedly suggested ways to describe the situation without framing it as police trouble. That single detail changed the tone of the entire conversation. Suddenly, investigators weren't just looking at a message from someone seeking emergency advice. Instead, prosecutors argue the messages may show someone trying to figure out how to explain a situation before authorities got involved. And for investigators, that raised a chilling possibility. Was Lee genuinely trying to understand what to do? Or was he already thinking about how the story might sound to the police? Because if prosecutors are right, the messages didn't end there. In fact, Lee allegedly asked another question that made the situation even more suspicious, and it involved a very specific kind of accident. But the questions didn't stop there. According to prosecutors, Darron Lee allegedly asked something else that immediately caught investigators' attention, and it sounded far less like panic and far more like someone testing a possible explanation. During the investigation, officials revealed that Lee reportedly asked ChatGPT whether a slip-and-fall accident could cause puncture wounds. And suddenly, they were looking at messages where Lee allegedly appeared to be asking if a completely different type of accident could explain those wounds. Prosecutors suggested this wasn't just curiosity. Investigators were already trying to understand how Gabriella Perpetuo had suffered the injuries that were later discovered. At first glance, that might seem like an oddly specific question. But to prosecutors, it raised a major red flag. Instead, they argued it may have been an attempt to see if a slip-and-fall story could make the injuries appear accidental. In other words, testing a narrative. That possibility quickly became a central argument in the case. If the prosecution's theory is correct, the messages might show someone trying to construct an explanation before the authorities started asking questions. Of course, Lee's defense has not accepted that interpretation, and the case is still unfolding in court. But the prosecution believes these digital conversations reveal something much darker. Because from their perspective, the messages suggest that Lee wasn't simply asking for help. They argue he may have been trying to figure out how to explain the scene. But the real shock came when prosecutors outlined what they say all these messages really mean. Hamilton County District Attorney Cody Womp told the court that the alleged ChatGPT conversations weren't just cries for help, they were, in their words, part of a calculated attempt to cover up a crime. According to prosecutors, Darron Lee was using AI like a personal legal advisor, trying to figure out exactly how to explain the injuries without implicating himself. Every question, every hypothetical scenario, seemed aimed at crafting a story that could hold up if authorities showed up. First-degree murder. Tampering with evidence. Fabricating a narrative. Those are the charges now facing Lee, and prosecutors argue the digital messages are central to proving intent. Even the seemingly minor details, the slip-and-fall question, the way he described his fiancée's injuries, suddenly took on a chilling significance. It's not just that someone asked for help. It's that the help they sought may have been for a purpose that's far darker. The idea that a former NFL star could turn to AI to navigate a potential cover-up stunned both the courtroom and the public. Sports fans, commentators, and social media users struggled to reconcile the image of a celebrated athlete with the allegations now dominating headlines. And while the defense has not confirmed Lee's intentions, prosecutors insist the timeline of events, combined with the AI messages, paints a picture of someone trying to control the narrative after a tragic, and possibly criminal, incident. While the courtroom focused on allegations, charges, and digital messages, the human cost of this tragedy was impossible to ignore. Gabriella Perpetuo's family was left devastated by her sudden, shocking death. In the wake of the loss, they launched a GoFundMe to help cover funeral expenses and attorney fees, a public plea that revealed both their grief and the financial strain that followed. The tragic and sudden loss of Gabriella has created emotional and financial hardships, the fundraiser read. Any help makes a difference. But the campaign was more than just a call for donations. The family also used it as a platform to raise awareness about domestic violence, hoping to prevent similar tragedies in other lives. Messages of love, sorrow, and remembrance poured in from friends, neighbors, and strangers touched by the story. Behind every legal argument and digital message, there was a grieving family trying to honor Gabriella's memory. They painted a picture of her life, her laughter, her presence in the community, and the heartbreak of a life cut tragically short. And while prosecutors argued over evidence and the public debated the AI's role, Gabriella's family was left with a painfully simple truth: nothing could undo the loss they were facing. But as the courtroom drama unfolds, one looming question remains: what will happen if Darron Lee is convicted, and could justice finally provide some closure for a family shattered by tragedy? And now, the stakes couldn't be higher. If prosecutors get their way, Darron Lee could face the death penalty for the alleged murder of Gabriella Perpetuo. Hamilton County officials have made it clear they see this as a case of premeditation, evidence tampering, and calculated decisions, fueled, they argue, in part by the AI messages. The courtroom will have to grapple with a chilling question: can digital conversations with a chatbot show intent in a real-world crime? Legal experts watching the case say it could set a precedent. Never before has a high-profile trial featured alleged use of AI to plan or explain actions after a violent crime. The implications for future cases, where technology intersects with criminal behavior, are massive. Meanwhile, the public is left in disbelief. Social media buzzed with debates about morality, technology, and accountability. Could a once celebrated NFL star really have turned to AI as a legal advisor after committing such a heinous act? Or is this another example of misinterpretation and fear surrounding new technology? The courtroom drama continues, but one thing is certain: the outcome of this trial will ripple far beyond Tennessee. It could shape conversations about AI, ethics, and the law in ways we're only beginning to understand. And while prosecutors prepare for a high-stakes battle, Gabriella's family, friends, and fans are left holding onto the hope that justice will ultimately reveal the truth. Because in this case, the line between digital guidance and real-world consequences has never felt so chilling. The final question now hangs over everyone following this story: what really happened that night, and could AI have played a role in one of the most shocking alleged crimes involving a former NFL player in recent history?